arguably one of the most elite athletes in the world, and also then you have the most elite trainers and coaches, and then you chuck on top of that like Performance Institute, which are just freak scientists and athletes combined. Now you have this sort of trifecta of just progression. Welcome back. We are Casuals Corner, and today we have got the hot topic of arguably one of the biggest heavyweight fights of all time and one of the most exciting, definitely, of recent years in Ngannou and Stipe. But one of the hottest questions around this fight, of course, they fought 3 years ago, which is a long time, is what is different since the last time out, since their last night out? So, Frank, I want you to give me the cold, hard facts. What is different, and what is different in the fight?
It's hard to say, right, because no one's been able to survive the onslaught that is Francis Ngannou and kind of be able to get to that grappling aspect of it where he showed a little bit of a weakness. If you'll remember, right, he's beat Curtis Blades twice, right? So he beat Curtis Blades, lost to Stipe, and then he rematched Curtis Blades, and everyone was like, oh, now that Curtis Blades knows this, because obviously he's... And then he fought Blades again, and everyone was like, oh, this is the worst matchup for him. He can't grapple at all, but he dealt with that, you know? So that just more speaks to the strength of Stipe more than anything. So it's interesting. I'm on the fence. I don't know if we've even given predictions, but I'm being swayed day by day, you know. I'm like, oh, maybe Stipe, maybe Francis. That's what makes a fight great, right? Yeah, like, what's going to happen? What are your thoughts, feelings?
Well, it's exactly what I sort of just said. It's 3 years ago, which is a hell of a time. And like we sort of know, Ngannou he's not new to the sport, but he's still learning and he's still developing in the sport. So 3 years is a hell of a time. And 3 years is a hell of a time when you're arguably one of the most elite athletes in the world, and also then you have the most elite trainers and coaches, and then you chuck on top of that like Performance Institute, which are just freak scientists and athletes combined. Now you have this sort of trifecta of just progression, and he's a sponge for information. If you sort of watch Francis Ngannou, so many questions about his sort of beginnings and where he comes from, and it only seems to sort of motivate him more. He doesn't have that outlook of, okay, I'm sort of successful, I'm here and I came from there, cool, let's relax. It's really the sort of other way round almost. And when you sort of see him in interviews, like, it is really intriguing because his work ethic is off the chart. So it was just as I was saying, you sort of chuck all those things into a mixing bowl. It's terrifying because we're having these conversations of, oh, we haven't seen much of him. Maybe we haven't seen much of him because everything's been going so swimmingly for him in that 3 years off, because like he hasn't made it out that first round since, well, like, apart from but we don't speak about that.
Yeah.
But just moving on to Stipe anyway, which was more what this video was going to be based off of, just about how criminally, and I will repeat, criminally overlooked he is for this fight. I was going to say underrated, but that's the wrong word, because he's not underrated as a fighter. Overlooked for this fight is a better use of the term. And coming in as an underdog, which I don't know how that works out, but let me know what you think on that one.
Put some respect on Stipe's name. Y'all must have forgot. He's where he's at for a reason, right? He's just a tremendous fighter. He's good everywhere, well-rounded, experienced in those later rounds. So as you saw, he can kind of get out of that first round and then sort of know how to push himself through those later rounds. So I do think that is a key for Stipe, getting out of that first round, right? But then I also think Francis knows that, and we're going to see maybe a more patient Francis, just not trying to take his head off. Maybe he's like, okay, I can't knock this guy out straight away. I might need to be here for the long run, so I'm going to pick my shots. But when I go hard, but I don't just try and brawl with this guy. I'm going to hit him hard, but I'm not going to blow my load, you know? What do you think?
It's interesting you sort of said about that first round as well, because that was a big thing coming into the last matchup, because obviously Ngannou was walking in with a brutal first round KO. I mean, as he often does when he walks into a fight with Stipe. And then that first round must have been, was very, very cagey. And I've just been watching the interview with Ariel Helwani and Stipe, and they sort of discussed that. And Ariel Helwani actually said it was one of the best rounds of the year, just because there was so much pressure on that one point that I somewhat agree, because it was huge. It wasn't just a one round. It felt almost like a fight in a round.
Imagine being there.
Oh, it must have been incredible, because that 5 minutes, almost the nerve, I can imagine the sort of feelings within that 5 minutes almost equated to a sort of fight of just, because no matter who you are, in the back of your head, I don't care what anyone tells me, when you're standing across from that man, not necessarily when you're in the cage, but when you're walking into the cage, there is not any part of you that hasn't once thought about those first round KOs. So, I mean, everyone deals with it differently, but I can imagine that it's definitely apparent. But it's very interesting, because Stipe comes into this fight, and when they sort of ask him, what have you improved on, what's changed, he answers as you would sort of imagine. It's like what we sort of touched upon before. He's an incredibly well-rounded athlete, and there's almost not a ton, obviously there's always things to learn, but there's not going to be a ton of new stuff that he's going to be integrating. But he basically said the same thing. He said he's more efficient, he said he's stronger, and he's quicker than he's ever been. And it didn't seem as though it was one of those, I'm the best shape of my life. It wasn't anything like that. When he was asked what he was focusing on and what was different since the last time around, he just said that is it. So that's very interesting. And then obviously on the other side, you've got Ngannou, which we literally just touched upon, but Dewey Cooper, his coach as well, said it was interesting sort of listening to what he was saying about Ngannou and how far he's come, but it was a lot of wrestling. They've been doing a lot of wrestling coming into this fight, which you would imagine. And again, it was just, obviously, I can't speak of what they've necessarily specifically been practicing on, but Dewey Cooper was saying about refining technique, because the thing is with Francis Ngannou is he has a lot of leeway when it comes down to his technique, because he's such an athletic specimen. You can get away with a little bit more, and that's what they were sort of saying. So as soon as they started refining his techniques with his wrestling, his jiu-jitsu and his punching and whatnot, it just becomes that sort of next level of effectiveness. So it poses some interesting questions for Saturday.
It's a very, very interesting one, right? Because you think, I know we touched on this a bit yesterday, since their last fight, bar Derek Lewis, Francis couldn't have done much better in terms of how he's looked. Because when he went into that first Stipe fight, right, he's coming off that over-him knockout, and he had that air of like, oh my God, this guy is the future. He is going to kill everyone. And then Stipe beat him, and everyone's like, oh, then he had the Derek Lewis thing, and everyone's like, oh, he can't grapple. He's just a striker. We've seen his likes before. Someone even called him Czech Congo with braids. It's like, put some respect on his name, you know. He sort of lost that aura, but he's got it back now, you know. He's on a hot streak where he's just looked unbeatable. So it's kind of like the first fight, but with the knowledge of what happened in the first fight going into it, you know. So it is interesting, because often rematches, when you lose 5 rounds to none, aren't too entertaining or intriguing is the word in the lead up, right? Because you're like, we've seen this before, but he's made such statements in those fights in his off time that it does pose other questions. Like, we don't know how it's going to play out.
I think the problem with UFC, and I think this sport is probably the worst for it just because of the way it's structured, is any fan in sports, and well, I say most fans in sports, the people that always seem to hate have tremendous recency bias. But the difference is, if you have recency bias within football, it's absolutely fine, because you can get trashed 7-0 one week, and then the next week you win 1-0, and everything's sort of forgotten about. You're not the worst team in the world anymore. But with the UFC, you can have one fight a year. So if you have a very, very bad fight, or you get knocked out, or you lose, like Ngannou did, he instantly went from the biggest prospect in the heavyweight division to, that was all hype, completely derailed. And then he got a couple of wins, and he said it's so fickle, and it's such recency bias. So it's very bad for that. But
MMA's fickle.
It really is. Like, a lot of sports are, but I just think the way that it's sort of structured, there's such long periods of time that you have that. It's like what I just said with Cody Garbrandt, like literally just what I said on the other video with Cody Garbrandt when we was giving predictions. I just couldn't stop thinking about his knockout, because that's the last time we saw him, and that's recency bias. It's fine.
Facts.
The last thing that I want to sort of bring up on this video, and I messaged you about it earlier, was Stipe Miocic, and just him as an athlete, to be honest, in general, and also how he's overlooked for this fight and the underdog. Because I mean, I would say arguably, but it's not arguably. He is the greatest to ever do it in this sport at that division. He is. He's defended the title more than anyone else, and
baddest man on the planet.
Exactly, that speaks volumes. But not just that. I mean, the fella's a firefighter. He's got a communications major from university. He's a Golden Gloves winner. This guy also, on top of that, he was a Div 1 baseball player and a Div 1 wrestler.
Athlete.
So there's not many more impressive athletes in the UFC, I would say, because Div 1 is an exceptional level of sport, as we know. And to have someone compete...
people.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's so true. Impressive people, yeah. He's almost like... It's almost like you've sort of took all the cliche, very good things and sort of chucked it all in one sort of melting pot. Firefighter, like major, like best in the world.
I don't get how he's not a bigger star. I really don't understand it.
It literally was my next point, and that was exactly like my last point to this. How this guy isn't sort of heralded as the most impressive guy in the UFC, but that's just... He's a victim of his own success and luck to an extent, because when you look at him, he doesn't jump out the page. He's in incredible shape for a heavyweight, but he isn't a freak in any sense. And he's not very outspoken, and he's not very sort of jumps on the media at any given opportunity, doesn't call people out. So he doesn't play the game in that sense, not that he wants to, but it sort of takes a light away from him a little bit. But when he gets that spotlight back, you realise this fella is impressive. And to the last little add-on to that, he also cuts his hair perfectly above his eyebrow, so it can't physically go in his eyes in a fight, because that is my pet peeve, and I always go on about that.
He's smart. Yeah, just to touch on that point you made, I do think that I don't understand why Stipe isn't a bigger star than he is. I don't think the UFC are massively into him not being a firefighter but having another job, because it sort of takes away from the fact that he's not putting all his effort into being the baddest man in the world, if that makes sense. It almost takes away from it a little bit as an actual brand. But should Ngannou get through him, he's just so marketable. He's exactly what you want from a heavyweight champ. Just an absolute assassin that can put people out with one shot. Like when you think, oh, baddest man on the planet, you look at him and go, yeah, probably is. So I feel like if Ngannou should win, expect him to be a big star globally in America, especially in Africa. He'll be huge. It'll be huge for him. So it's an interesting one to see how it's all going to play out.
And the UFC at the moment are even trying to set up a event in Africa, so you can already sort of see that pathway. Not necessarily that's just for Ngannou. Obviously, we've got champs in Usman and Adesanya as well. But the thing is with Ngannou, which is the polar opposite, which we just sort of said about Miocic, he is the perfect, and I mean the perfect image for the UFC and for that division as well, because everyone is pulled. There is a gravitational pull to heavyweights, because they're in that 1%, right? They're in that smaller population, and we like to see just, I want to say freaks, but it sort of is freaks of nature. It is freaks of nature.
There's something about it when they're heavyweights.
Of course, it's the same way. I mean, it's not the same thing, but it's the same way that like 30 years ago, 40 years ago, however long, they used to go to freak shows, and people with like all these crazy things used to go and watch. And it's obviously not that, but it's not a million miles away, because in Ngannou you have someone that is literally larger than life. He is a monster. He is chiseled. He doesn't look like he should look like that. He looks like he should be a flyweight, literally in a heavyweight division. It doesn't make sense. He has very, very humble beginnings. He has an incredible story. He's just a very likable guy all round. So yeah, he has a very, very sort of different pull from the UFC, doesn't he, Ngannou? So like you said, I think if he does take that win, he's going to be a global superstar.
Facts. It's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful fight. I cannot wait for this one. We've given our predictions. Will they be right? Will they be wrong? We don't know. What do we know, though? We know one thing and one thing only.
We will find out.
There we have it. You know the vibes, people. If you are a supporter of our content, we thank you. If you're just watching and you're new here, we pump out a lot of this sort of stuff. So make sure you like, subscribe, follow us on all platforms. It really would mean a lot to us, and we appreciate your support in advance.
And I actually realised I didn't give my prediction, so I'm going to quickly give it Ngannou second round knockout. Bang.
Let's go. Stipe grinds out a decision.
I've said all that about Stipe, and then I go against him, but I just knew you were going to go for Stipe, so I went the other way. It was clever.
There we go. Someone's got to be right, someone's got to be wrong, but we're going to find out. Boo.